As language evolves and new terms enter the mainstream, teenagers are often blamed for debasing linguistic standards. But teens don't actually influence language as much as is often claimed. Very commonly, people think that teenagers are ruining language because they are texting or using shorthand or slang. But our language is constantly developing and changing and becoming what it needs to be for the generation who is speaking it. As a linguist, I find this really exciting because it shows me that our language is alive. During high school, teenagers often explore their own identities and may again choose to change their pronunciations and use language as a part of their identities. When these teens grow up and graduate from college or get a job, they may change their language again to sound more professional and meet the demands of their jobs and pressures of the workplace. The fear of teenagers ruining a language, therefore, is baseless. But this does not mean that languages do not need preservation. On one hand, language is evolving, primarily because of teenagers. On the other hand, many languages are also under the threat of being dominated by others. Even though teenagers are not responsible for this change, their role in preserving them is crucial. When language, along with cultural wisdom and pride, are no longer passed down to the next generation, children and our society as a whole lose something.
The rural poor are divided into subsets based on profession, typically, cultivators who own land and non-cultivators who do not. Cultivators are slightly better off, as they are able to make some money operating farms and charging tenants for using their land. Non-cultivators, however, are extremely poor, working as seasonal laborers on farms. Their pay is both low and erratic, as it is based on the schedules of farm owners and the other few employers available. The rural poor often suffer more than the urban poor because public services and charities are not available to them. Several factors tend to perpetuate rural poverty. For example, political instability and corruption, customs of discrimination, unregulated landlord or tenant arrangements and outdated economic policies often make it impossible for the rural poor to rise above poverty lines. Former residents of rural areas are typically drawn to the city for the perceived wealth of economic opportunities, but often, those dreams fall short. Compared to rural villages, there are indeed more job opportunities in urban areas. However, many migrants lack the skill set to take on many jobs, and positions for unskilled laborers fill up quickly. This shortage of jobs leaves new residents without a steady income, which creates a series of new problems in the city.
Ancient myth says that Atlantis was a powerful undersea city, whose warriors conquered many parts of Europe. There is little proof that such a city existed, but human fascination with the world under the ocean certainly has existed for centuries. Before scientists invented sonar, many people believed the ocean floor was a completely flat surface. Now we know that the seafloor is far from flat. In fact, the tallest mountains and deepest canyons are found on the ocean floor, far taller and deeper than any landforms found on the continents. The same tectonic forces that create geographical features like volcanoes and mountains on land create similar features at the bottom of the oceans. New species are discovered in the ocean each year by marine biologists and other ocean scientists. Many of these newly discovered species live deep on the ocean floor in unique habitats that depend on plate movement, underwater volcanoes, and cold water seeps. Previously, sunlight was thought to be the energy source that supported the base of every food web on our planet. But organisms in these deep, dark ecosystems have no access to sunlight, and instead metabolize hydrogen sulfide or other chemicals through different processes. With only 5% of the ocean explored, many more scientific discoveries await our future generations of explorers in this final unknown frontier of our planet Earth.
Timeless lessons from Nelson Mandela's life story will endure for years to come. Mandela was a gifted visionary. He exercised a full range of cognitive, emotional and behavioral abilities to bring about profound change in South Africa. All leaders who aspire to be more strategic can learn from Mandela's behavior that distinguishes him as a true strategic leader. Mandela looked ahead and could see that South Africa's system of apartheid would not survive into the future. From his prison cell, he strategically assessed his moves and anticipated reactions. When offered freedom in exchange for renouncing opposition to the government, Mandela refused the offer. Mandela stood out among prisoners and guards as a man of principle and dignity, willing to sacrifice his life for his beliefs. Despite harsh prison life, Mandela mustered energy to challenge his keepers. Through word, deed and symbol, he challenged the system that denied him liberty. Mandela exemplifies how a strategic leader adjusts strategy and execution amid complex social, political, legal and economic forces without compromising deeply held values. Leadership is not just about motivating people and creating political support for a strategy, but also about maintaining broad support through successive adjustments to the plan.
To study the conditions that promote delay of gratification or being satisfied, the American psychologist Walter and his colleagues designed an experimental test, in which a child is asked to choose between a larger treat, such as 2 cookies, and a smaller treat, such as 1 cookie. After stating a preference for the larger treat, the child learns that to obtain that treat, it is necessary to wait for the experimenter to return. The child is also told that if he or she signals the experimenter will return and the child will receive the smaller treat. Thus, the smaller treat is available now, but the larger treat requires waiting. To get the larger treat, the child must resist the temptation to get an immediate treat. That experimental situation has proven very useful both in demonstrating the importance of the ability to delay gratification, and in identifying strategies that make it possible for children to delay gratification. Children who were best able to wait in that situation when they were 4 years old are more socially and academically successful as high school students, and earn higher SAT scores. The situation, adapted for adolescents and teens, also revealed that middle and high school students who can wait a week for a monetary reward earn higher grades, show less problem behavior in school, and are less likely to use cigarettes, alcohol, and other drugs than their peers who choose not to wait.
We're looking at fat tissue, in particular, to see what controls how much fat people accumulate. We know that the more fat you have, the more detrimental that is to health. What we're able to do in a lab is take fat cells and grow them in the lab and see how they behave. We're quite interested in how natural steroids affect how fat tissue behaves. So we can see if you give steroids to fat tissue, whether they accumulate more fat and see how this changes their behavior. The idea is that if we can understand exactly how steroids work on fat tissue, we can design treatments that might help prevent people become overweight or obese. And perhaps reduce their risk of things like diabetes, which we know is quite related to exactly how much fat tissue you have. The other thing we're very interested in is where you have fat tissue, because not all fat tissue is the same. So fat tissue stored within the abdomen itself is much worse. Fat tissue around organs really does increase your risk of developing things like diabetes quite dramatically. On the other hand, if you store fat just underneath the skin, that's actually a much better place to store fat. If we can understand where this fat is stored, we can try and design treatments that selectively reduce one fat tissue deposit as opposed to another.
People are aging. There are a lot more people in the older generation who are living longer, but not necessarily staying healthy for a large part of their lives. We're trying to understand factors that contribute to the quality of their life. My current research is mainly looking at factors like stress and how it affects our immune system. So what I'm quite excited about is looking at older people and factors that are important to them. For one, we're looking at bereavement, or in other words, a state of sorrow, and how that affects the immune system. Often after older people have had a bereavement, they go quite quickly downhill themselves, often from pneumonia. So we're trying to understand, how does bereavement affect a particular cell that is good at fighting off pneumonia? Another thing that we're doing is we're looking at hip fracture in older people, which is again another common event, and we're trying to understand the impact of depression. Often people in hospital with a hip fracture develop depression, and these are the people that then go on to become frail a lot more quickly than others. They get infections, often these infections lead to death. We're trying to slow down that progression to frailty. If we can understand how these factors interact more, then we actually start doing something about it.
Is coin tossing truly random, or it's just our ignorance over the physical parameters? A famous mathematician began to study instances of change, questioning whether the things we think we know are, in fact, true. Like the coin toss, for example. Most people assume the toss of a coin is always a 50-50 probability, with a 50% chance it lands on heads, and a 50% chance it lands on tails. But our mathematician believes that the coin toss is not about probability at all. It is about physics, the coin, and how the tosser is actually throwing it. The majority of times, if a coin is heads up when it is flipped, it will remain heads up when it lands. Our mathematician has even trained himself to flip a coin and make it come up heads 10 out of 10 times. A similar effect is seen if the coin is spun. Because of the way most coins are made, the heads side can weigh more, which means it will fall on that side, leaving the other side up more often. Further, some magicians will have coins that are shaved, giving more weight to one side. It's possible to make things random. If you flip a coin quite vigorously, it's as close to being a fair event, 50-50, as I know, if you flip it and catch it on your hand. However, we usually don't do them vigorously. If you think about it the least little bit, you'll realize it's not random at all. In fact, there are people around carnivals who have been able to flip a coin and keep control over it. The point? It's not magic at all, it's math.
Well, people might be surprised to know that actually, our experience of taste begins extremely early, and in fact, it begins in the womb. For example, when a pregnant mother eats a very garlicky dinner, her fetus also experiences that garlicky taste within the amniotic fluid. So there are a variety of flavors that do pass through into the uterine environment and actually have been shown to affect babies' acceptance of those flavors after they've been born. Exposure is the way that we learn to like things. The evidence seems to suggest that that exposure can start in the womb. There are also some genetic differences in our ability to taste specific tastes, particularly bitter tastes. These are often quite obvious when you look at individual children and their willingness to try, for example, green vegetables. So there will be some children for whom, green vegetables might not be their favorite things, but they will accept them. And others who, for example, behave like you're trying to kill them. Those children are what we call super tasters, and they have a genetic predisposition to taste the bitter chemicals that are present, particularly in green vegetables, and will therefore of course find it much less easy to accept those kinds of vegetables into their daily diets.
A lot goes into creating an eye-catching, user-friendly website. Web developers and designers must work together to produce websites that will be located by search engines, engage customers, and stimulate conversions. Firstly, finding the right name for your brand is crucial. In addition to being memorable, a domain name needs to accurately reflect your brand's voice and be nearly impossible to misspell. A simple and unique name leads to a higher chance of being located in search engine results. Another important thing to remember during the process of website development is to create a clean, appealing design. A quality design is attractive and easy to read. Most importantly, a clean design helps viewers focus on the value of your brand and content. Color schemes are also important in a website design. Different colors have the ability to evoke emotional responses, such as calm, happiness, or frustration. When it comes to using colors in your website design, it's essential to consider your company's niche, target audience, branding, and the elements of color theory. Your website's design, navigation, and content must engage customers and inspire further interaction with your brand.